Listeners, you've caught us at a very tense time. We've performed a ritual to get Stephen out of the Neo Geo pocket that he was trapped in, but I think his save file must have been corrupted because we've got him out, but he's been possessed by some kind of demon. Adam and Ryan are performing an exorcism now, and I think we're almost there. I just hope that we can banish this SNK demon and get our Stephen back so we can do the podcast. Ryan, throw open the switches on the sonic oscillator.
Okay.
Now step up the reactor power input 3 more points. Yes, I think it's working. Is everyone okay?
Yep, I'm all good. Thank fuck.
I think I made it.
Stephen, are you back with us?
Well, that's the last time I go to Shady Bay.
Now Ryan, make sure you keep the Neo Geo turned off and bury it somewhere deep. And whatever you do not dig it back up next Halloween purely just to get the demon to do a game review. Because that would be the worst.
Jeez, that was one hell of a trip. Well, now that everyone's okay, I guess it's time to get started. For this month, we're actually dealing with horror games, so we're going from one hell straight into another. So let's say hello again to everyone now that they've recovered. Hi guys.
Hello.
Hi.
I hope you've got a fresh pair of trousers on for these spooky games that we've got on offer.
I don't think they keep underwear in a Neo Geo.
That's true.
Yeah, it's been a bit.
Bit soggy. Right, well, we can jump straight into the first pick, and this time we'll start off with mine. Okay, so my pick was a game called Exhumed. It was known as Power Slave in America, and I think it's Senkrai 1999 or something in Japan. It was released on the PlayStation, the Sega Saturn, and the PC, MS-DOS specifically, I believe, by Lobotomy Software. Now, before I get into like the 3 different versions, I'm going to give you a quick history of Lobotomy Software. They've got a real interesting backstory, and I imagine you guys aren't aware of it. Basically, they were a small development team, and they wanted to prove that they could port Duke Nukem 3D to the Saturn and make a competent port. And it was kind of seen as the impossible port. I think it was Duke Nukem 3D. It was either Duke Nukem 3D or Quake. It could have been Quake. But either way, one of them was seen as basically impossible to port to current consoles. And they managed to pull it off. They created their own engine, effectively, and built it from the ground up, but in a way that looked identical to the original game. So when you're playing it, it is a different engine from like the original Quake engine, but it's using their engine instead, which ran perfectly. Like, you know, from a console that shouldn't even be doing 3D sprites, it actually managed to run and run well, and they basically pulled off a miracle. The best way to describe it is what are they called? Push button or something like panic button? What they did with Doom on the Nintendo Switch, where people say they worked miracles to get it on such a console which shouldn't even be running it. They were basically like panic button of their day. And they did Duke Nukem, as I say, they did Quake, and they did their own game, which was Exhumed. And then they basically ran out of money. and they ended after those 3 games. And it's one of those things where it's a real shame because they were such a talented group of people that if the situation had been different and they'd have continued making games, they could have been like the rareware of their day. So yeah, it's quite an interesting history. I would recommend looking it up on YouTube and finding more information out about them because I say it's a real interesting story for the Sega Saturn.
I do believe it was indeed Quake that they actually did because I'm pretty sure I've seen a documentary on it.
Yeah, I think they all released around the same time. I think they released all 3 games around the 1997 era, so I don't really recall which one was first. I know Exhumed wasn't first because that was like their pet project, and yeah, it probably was Quake.
Well, they apparently I just looked it up. They ported both.
Yeah, they did both of them.
They did Quake and Duke Nukem, and then they did Power Slave.
Yeah, they did both of those games and Exhumed, so that's basically their trilogy of games for the Sega Saturn, and they're all brilliant games, and they run really well on the Sega Saturn. With Exhumed, it was a weird one because it wasn't just one game that they released on the 3 platforms. They actually released 3 different games. So the console versions are the most similar, but they still have a lot of changes between them. They're structured like I always describe it like Metroid Prime or a Metroid-type game where you collect abilities and upgrades and different weapons in order to go back and access new areas and new levels. And the PC version is basically just like an Egyptian Doom clone, and they took all that back and just made it a bit more straightforward for the PC for some reason. But the console versions in particular, really good and, really adventurous for the time because I don't believe there were any first-person shooters at least on the consoles that were doing anything, anywhere near as ambitious. I played the Sega Saturn version. Which version did you guys play?
I also played the Saturn version.
I played the remake that was made for PC called Power Slave EX that's based on the PlayStation version, so I guess that one.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's fan-made or what, but I know it was available for free. Yeah, I thought it was. I thought it was just like a fan-made version of the PlayStation game.
Yeah, it's unofficial and did receive a cease and desist at one point.
Did it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
I played the actual original DOS version, and it was a trip.
Right. Well, before I kind of go into my thoughts on the game and why I chose it, what do you guys think of it?
Personally, I really like the setting of the game. I like the aesthetics, the music. I think it works really, really well in that aspect. I wasn't too keen on the enemies, but I do like the whole design of going back into levels to do stuff that you couldn't do before.
How far did you actually get in the game?
I didn't get particularly far. I think I got to like the 6th level. The reason being I could not get to grip with the controls at all. My history with FPS games has been almost exclusively on PC. So I've been playing them with mouse and keyboard for decades. And going back to a controller, I really, really struggled to get any kind of decent progress in this game. As much as I wanted to, because I was enjoying, like I said, the setting, the gameplay, but just the controls really, really put me off. And I just ended up getting really, really frustrated with like trying to control it, knowing that if I had a mouse and keyboard connected, I could be super accurate and I could control it perfectly. So that kind of ruined the experience for me.
I think you might have been better off with the version that Stephen played, the fan-made remake, so that you could use a mouse and keyboard. I do get that the controls are difficult to get used to. I actually played Duke Nukem 3D first by Lobotomy, and they all use the same control scheme, and I had a lot of difficulty at first. But obviously I saw it through to the end, and then by the time I actually started Exhumed, I was already familiar with the control scheme.
Duke Nukem 3D is a rock-hard game anyway.
Yeah, and because the thing is, you can't save. You save after every level, so you've got to see it through to the end of a level with that control scheme, so it doesn't do you any favours. But yeah, it's funny how you mentioned that the enemy types. One of the criticisms I have with the game is that the start of the game doesn't start well. The setting's nice in Egypt, but the enemies you fight are, like, you start out with these kind of scaraby crab things, which just jump around and are a bit annoying. You've got these birds, and then you get these Anubis soldiers, like a few levels in.
Yeah.
But it's not until later on in the game that you start to see a bit of variety. Like, probably not long after those 6 levels that you got through, that's when you start seeing more of a variety of levels and you start seeing what the game can actually do. And it does actually get better from there. But you kind of have to work your way through the initial parts in order to get enjoyment from it.
The point where I actually got stuck, I think it was like the 5th or 6th level. I must have tried that level about 5 times, and I always died at some point in that level, and I had to start all the way back again. And
Which level was it? I don't know levels from off the top of my head, so what happened in it? Was it the one with the boulders?
It was the one after the one with the boulders. I don't know what the name of it was.
Okay. Was there any kind of particular obstacle or something that was killing you?
It was just the amount of enemies, the placement of them, and the amount of power-ups that were available. Just with the difficulties that I was already having, it just made it impossible for me to actually get through the level without dying.
One thing I'm not sure if you're aware of, but as I say, the game is quite like Metroid, and as such, you can get health upgrades where you get a whole new health bar on top. So using the abilities you've got so far, like, especially the high jump, you can go back to some of the earlier levels and, start stocking up on, like, health upgrades and stuff to make things a bit easier on you.
I wasn't aware of that, no.
Yeah, as I say, like, you've got upgrades which help with progression. Like you get grenades that can blow holes in walls and, as I mentioned, there's like a high jump and stuff. But you can use that to get more health and everything, which, I say really makes it more of an adventure game than an actual first-person shooter in that respect.
But I feel even with that, I would have been still really, really frustrated with the controls.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that you kind of have to push through and then wait until it clicks. Personally, I think those controls work when you get used to them, and I think it's the closest you can get to PC-like controls on a, what's basically a D-pad and a, half a dozen buttons. But yeah, I'd work through it if I were you, or at least switch to Power Slave EX and, see what you make of it on PC instead.
Yeah, because mouse and keyboard is just so ingrained into my brain at this point.
Yeah, definitely.
And so one of the big differences in just regular Power Slave is that, I guess, vanilla PC is that you run into the Anubis soldiers like it's the second room of the first level. You shoot some of the little spider scarabs, blow a door open, and then suddenly you open up a door, and then suddenly there's an Anubis soldier right there shooting at you.
I believe it's the 3rd level when they start appearing in the Saturn version. Am I right in thinking the 3rd level?
I believe it was the 2nd.
Yeah, it could be. So I think there's the introduction that, there's the initial one where you meet King Ramses, where nothing really happens. There's the hub level, Karnak, where
Yes.
I think there are some, but it's not until you get upgrades and stuff that you actually see them. And then I think the level after that is where you first meet them, and then there's only like a few of them. Am I thinking about that wrong, or...?
I thought it was level 2.
It depends on what you
wrong.
class as a level, because that introduction level is just like a few corridors. And it's picking up a pistol.
Yeah. I get you. So yeah, it would probably be level 3 then.
Yeah. So how was the DOS version then, Ryan?
Graphically, like I've looked at them back to back, graphically it's definitely looks like it's quite a bit less. Some of the textures and lighting are pretty chunky.
Really? Less than the console version?
That's what it feels like. I mean, maybe it's just the lighting makes it look a lot chunkier than it actually is.
Strange, because like the 3 versions were released more or less the same time. Because they released the Saturn version, then the MS-DOS, and then the PlayStation version. But like they were all just months within each other.
I was also having trouble with the control just because of how it was. Like I had going through DOSBox and like actually go to like the settings menu and adjust it and then relaunch the game. And it was weird because you can move forward and look around with the mouse. But if you try to strafe left or right, the mouse locks and you can't look around. And that's really awkward to know that I can't strafe sideways. Like I can't walk sideways and turn at the same time. It won't let you do it.
That's weird, because you can in the console versions, which is
Yeah,
very
and
bizarre, because
and
you'd
maybe
expect it to be in the PC one.
yeah, and maybe that was just the way I had the settings set up. I might have messed something up then, but that made the game really difficult because,
Yeah.
well, navigation got really clunky.
I mean, I can't really comment on that version because I've never played it, but I can imagine it would be a bit of a pain.
Yeah.
Early mouse and keyboard control systems, they weren't really fully optimized yet. I mean, it's kind of like today how you've got on a keyboard, WAS and D is always your movement keys because it's kind of like become standardized. And
But back then it was direction keys, wasn't it? It was like up, down, left, right.
yeah, Doom actually had direction keys back in the day. I mean, the version that I play actually has like an overlay and a lot of stuff, and you can redo key bindings and stuff like that. But back in the day, you kind of like had non-standardized control systems, and different companies were trying different things. So you would end up with one or two games which had kind of odd control schemes if you go back to them now. That they're a little bit difficult to use.
Yeah, a lot of the controls were weird. Like, you could adjust the mouse sensitivity with F7 and F8 either up or down. Strafing left and right is just so slow. You walk left and right very slowly unless you hold down run, in which case you move at a normal speed. So that was a bit odd. When it was originally mapped, for some reason, I don't know why, but it was set mostly up with SOD, but for some reason, A was strafe left and jump.
Weird.
So yeah, if I wanted to move left, I was hopping to the left, which was a little awkward. I had to fix that.
Presumably the fan version that Steven played kind of fixes that, so it's, got more quality of life things in it.
No, I'm going to grab that because as much as I was enjoying this, I'm sure I'm going to enjoy like a full game just that much more.
Oh yeah, I think you probably would do.
Oh yeah, definitely. But I was real proud of myself because I managed to blow myself up in the first 45 seconds of actually playing. Once I figured out the controls, I walked up to one of the little skull torches, shot it twice, and died.
Oh yeah, that's the thing as well.
They explode. Like, I killed myself. I'm like, okay, so those explode.
Not all of them.
Then I backed off and shot when I came back in. I shot it again, and I still died because they explode real big.
Well, what happens is they fire like explosive pellets in, like one direction and another direction, I think. But not all of them explode. I don't know if it's the same on the PC version, but some of them you break and they break like vases and they contain items. Others just explode and fuck you over. So you have to learn to shoot them from a distance just in case. So you end up wasting ammo for potential like ammo or health. It's a little bit of a pain and a bit of an annoying mechanic, but it's not as bad later on in the game when you've got more weapons and more ammo. But like early on in the game, it's just like I'm using all my pistol ammo to blow up this, and it's giving me fuck all.
Sometimes they've got enemies in them as well, the little crabby fellas.
Head crabs.
Yep. So that's a bit annoying. Moving on from there, Stephen, how does the fan version play on the PC? Do they actually map the mouse and keyboard quite well, or?
From what I could tell, it's got a pretty good control mapping system. You can even customize it to some degree. I'm pretty sure I was using a controller for mine. It seemed like it was pretty well put together.
Yeah, well, I think it is basically it's probably using the PC engine from the original game, but creating the, like the levels from the PlayStation version. I don't really know how they did it because I only really know that it exists. So how was the game? I'd say I think the setup is generally the same as the Saturn version, so I imagine your experience is probably similar to, like what a Saturn owner would be getting.
It was basically the PC, not the PC, the PlayStation version, but better made. And yeah, it just, I liked the setting. I liked, some of the stuff they set up with it. I didn't get too far. I mean, it was, I enjoyed it. I think it speaks to the games we picked that this is probably my least favorite of the four, and I still really enjoyed it.
It was my least favorite as well, but I can see how it's not really the game's fault, more the control scheme's fault for me.
Yeah, I get that. As I say, because I remember having difficulty with Duke Nukem 3D, I can certainly see how that would be a barrier to enjoyment. But I think that it's one of those control schemes where it does work for the game once you kind of get your head around it and you learn how to use it. But it's a difficult roadblock to overcome.
And plus, I've got the not very good Saturn pad as opposed to the really good one, which probably didn't help.
That'll probably make things like really bad then, because the bad Saturn pad is like the D-pad on it's shit, and the triggers on it are really bad, and it's just a terrible, uncomfortable controller. So honestly, I think that might be why you're having such a difficult time, because like even with Duke Nukem, I think it was maybe a handful of levels before I started to adapt to it. I think using that bad controller probably didn't help at all. I would say wait until you get a new controller and then maybe give it a second try. Or play the PC one. Right, so I guess the overall impression of Exhumed was a bit of a mixed bag then. I think, we could see some good things in it, but I think, Stephen and Matt, you guys didn't like it so much.
Well, I liked it. It's just, I just liked the other ones that much better.
All right, okay.
Yeah, I like the idea of it, but it was more my own
personal
issues that ruined it for me.
I would say definitely at least try the Power Slave EX version.
Yeah.
At least saying you've got a mouse and keyboard. And as I say, I think the PlayStation version, whilst being considered inferior, I think it'll still offer you a similar enough experience that you'll, probably enjoy it a bit more.
I would like to throw this in before we move on to the next game, that the name Power Slave comes from the Iron Maiden album. Power Slave.
I was wondering about that.
Because
is that why they had to change the name to Exhumed in the UK?
Quite probably because Iron Maiden released, I believe it was their fourth or fifth album, and it was the album Power Slave, and it was all Egyptian themed, like for the art and shit.
That's a really good album.
Yeah, and I guess they're like, hey, look, this will be completely relevant in 20 years. Yeah, they named it Power Slave because of the Iron Maiden album, and then I guess when it went over to the UK, there might have been some legal issues.
Definitely.
Yeah, could have been. All right, well, let's end that one there, and what we'll do is we'll rejoin. I think given the control issues in this one would mean that it's probably appropriate to go to Matt's game next. So we'll take a quick break and we'll resume with Matt's pick.
Okay, my game is Resident Evil for the GameCube. This is a remake of the PlayStation 1 game. The PlayStation 1 had 3 Resident Evil games, 3 mainline Resident Evil games. The first one coming out in 1996 and was followed up with Resident Evil 2, which is my personal favourite of the PlayStation 1 titles. And then it had Resident Evil 3, not quite as good, but still a really solid title. And for some reason, Capcom entered into an exclusivity agreement with Nintendo for the GameCube and released 2 exclusive at the time Resident Evil games, a remake of the first one, and Resident Evil 0, which was a prequel to the first one.
Wasn't there 3 exclusives, including Resident Evil 4?
Oh no, there were 5. They were actually called the Capcom 5.
But I don't think Resident Evil 0 and 1 were part of that, were they? I think Resident Evil 4 was part of it, but then...
Resident Evil 4 was part of it.
Resident Evil 4 was part of the Capcom 5,
yeah.
But 1 and 0 were just other side things.
1 and 0 were developed exclusively for that system, and it wasn't until quite a long time later that they actually came out on a non-Nintendo system.
But it's just funny because Resident Evil 4 was supposed to be a GameCube exclusive, and it's been ported to everything.
Yeah. Well, didn't Resident Evil 4 like get delayed? Like it was originally supposed to be a GameCube exclusive, and it got delayed and released after, or like around the same time as its port to the PlayStation 2? Or am I thinking of something else? I might be thinking of a different game.
Else. I think the Capcom 5 were quite long-standing ports for a while.
Resident Evil 4 was kind of made as a direct response to the fact that the remake of Resident Evil actually didn't sell very well. So Capcom took it into a new direction. They took it in a more action-oriented direction rather than the slow-moving puzzle survival horror that the first one had. And some may say, to its detriment, it went into a more action-oriented direction because it does really, really change up the gameplay style. But going back to the original Resident Evil, it didn't sell great at the time, but it is widely recognized now as being somewhat of a classic. It has had HD versions released on pretty much everything, and basically it's one of those very few games where the remake is actually better than the original. As good and well remembered as the original Resident Evil is, this does improve on it in so many ways.
But not everywhere.
Not in every way, but it's one that I've played a lot. I kind of like know it inside out, and it is, whilst not as good as the PlayStation Resident Evil 2, for me personally, it is probably my second favourite Resident Evil game. So what did you guys think of it?
Well, can I just address my one criticism with the game? I want to go into my history with Resident Evil, a bit later on. But my main criticism where the game doesn't improve is the voice acting. I actually find that the voice acting in the remake detracts from the experience because the voice acting is notorious in the original game for being terrible. But it's terrible in a fantastic way. Sort of like the Symphony of the Night dialogue, for example, where in the remake that they did or the remaster for the PSP version, they changed all the dialogue and it ruined it, which I think is what's in the recent Requiem version as well.
Yes, that's going to be the PSP version.
Yeah, and I think that it kind of takes a certain element from the game away. Like as good as Symphony of the Night is, without that dialogue, it kind of loses a little something. Not enough to spoil the game, but it's something that's noticeable. It's something that when I play the Japanese version, it's something I miss, even though I've only played the English version once. And I think it's the same with the Resident Evil, because the dialogue was just fantastic.
Though with that dialogue, I think it kind of suited the somewhat janky nature of the first game really, really well. And the remake goes into more of a
more serious,
a more serious kind of tone. And I think it wouldn't have worked if, like Barry was saying, here's this lockpick. It would be best if you, the master of unlocking, take it. That it just wouldn't work in that more serious context, I don't think.
That's true, but I mean, you get to phrase like, you were almost a Jill sandwich. And then when he says, we could have almost fit you into a sandwich, it kind of feels like it's losing a certain element. Because I get what you're saying about it being more serious, and it is. But at the same time, it's still a very silly story, and it's still got a lot of, B-movie janky tropes to it, even though it looks a lot more serious and is definitely a lot scarier. I mean, like the fact that you go into this area and then there's like mutated sharks and stuff jumping at you. And then you've got like other bits where you've got this, it's mutated Lisa Trevor girl and stuff. Who's going, "Row." It's still got those stupid kind of horror movie moments. And I don't know, I think it still would have fit having those, dialogue lines. But that's just me, to be honest. I'd say the game is still really good. But I'm going to leave my thoughts until a little bit later. I'm interested in seeing what the other guys thought, because this wasn't my first rodeo with the game.
Well, I originally tried playing the GameCube version, and I absolutely could not get to grips with the tank controls. I don't know why. Because I was okay with it in Silent Hill. I'm not sure what the difference is, but I just could not deal with the tank controls in this one. So I ended up picking up the remake on Xbox One, and once I had the different control scheme, I actually thought the game was quite good. Like, I actually really enjoyed this game.
I think the reason that you might have had difficulties with that control scheme and not had difficulties with the Silent Hill one is that Silent Hill is like a 3D world where the camera moves with you, and Resident Evil is all pre-rendered backdrops, so you are kind of like shoveled into certain camera angles which don't actually change until you reach like the edge of the screen. Whereas with Silent Hill, the world moves with you, and you do have a limited amount of camera control. So that might be why the Resident Evil one might feel a little bit more stiff.
That might be the difference maker.
Yeah. But I wouldn't change the pre-rendered backgrounds for the world. Because I remember thinking, like, back then, and I still think it now, that the backgrounds just look fantastic. You play it on the GameCube, and that game looks stunning. If they'd have had, like, an actual 3D world, it wouldn't have looked anywhere near as good on the GameCube. And I think that having those static backgrounds helped up the quality of it. And because of the realism that they were going for, I think it makes the game a lot creepier, having these kind of, ultra realistic, backgrounds.
Yeah, and you're right, it does look fantastic on the GameCube. I mean, it's the reason I bought a GameCube to get that game. Because I knew I had to play the new Resident Evil, and I knew that was the only way it was going to happen.
Little did you know it would soon come out on a bunch of stuff.
That one didn't actually come out until...
the Wii, I suppose, was the first time that they re-released it.
Yeah, it didn't come out on a non-Nintendo console until the HD
remake.
What I always think about with the backgrounds is when Jim Sterling made a video called "We Need More Spencer Mansions," because he made the point that the mansion, you have to go through it so much that you learn the mansion and you can navigate it, even without the map. And you don't have a lot of locations, you don't have a lot of square footage, but there's so much packed into it, and there's so much character in the setting itself that it only enhances the game.
And the thing is, like, it kind of, even though you've got this one location, it sort of ramps up every time you go through. Because you go through, and then initially there's nothing, then there's zombies, and then you've got these redhead zombies that charge at you, then you've got, like, hunters and everything, and it's just like shit keeps building up and up that, you start to appreciate that you've memorized the mansion layout because you're having to basically run for your life and run to safety.
We'll touch on the Crimson Head mechanic a little bit later on, but in terms of the mansion, it is just a character in and of itself, and it's just a fantastic location to run around. Like Stephen said, you kind of don't need a map by the end of it because you've become so familiar with this location that you know it like the back of your hand, and it's just a joy to run through.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that the mansion is a really good horror setting, and it works so well. I mean, I actually played this game before I played the original Resident Evil, because I never had a PS1. So this was my first experience with the original game, and I was quite surprised that I liked it. This was back when I had a GameCube, and I just fell in love with it. The game I find terrifying to this day, where like it always puts me on edge, even though I'm very, very familiar with the game now. And I think it just works so well as a horror game.
Kind of one of the drawbacks of having played the remake before the original is there is a very, very famous scene in the original where you go through a certain corridor and dogs jump through the window. And it just scares the shit out of you when it happens because you're not expecting it. They just jump through that window and they start attacking you. And it's like a really, really famous scene.
And they're quick.
In the remake, you go through that corridor. That doesn't happen.
The windows crack.
You go through the corridor and you're like, oh, it's this bit. I know that these dogs are going to come. I'd better get ready. And then it doesn't happen. It is only when you go back through that corridor from the other direction that those dogs come out when you've already decided, oh, the game's not going to do the dogs. So that it really kind of like subverts your expectations, and if you haven't played the original before playing that, then you kind of like lose that aspect of it.
It's true, but it still scares you. I still remember thinking, shit, first time it happened. So I think you still do get that fright, but you don't appreciate the fact that the game's trying to trick you.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the Crimson Heads. Because while we're talking about the game being, quite terrifying, that was the main thing that I found very stressful. Because you have to either decapitate zombies or set them on fire, or later on they're going to come back as Crimson Heads, which are these ultra strong, ultra fast zombies that just hunt you down and really, really tear into you. And they really are a threat. They're just so horrifying because they're pretty unstoppable and they're pretty hard to take down.
Yeah, the thing is with burning them, like you say, you burn the zombie bodies, they won't come back as Crimson Heads. There are, I believe, 63 zombies in the entire game.
Yeah, there's not that much petrol.
There's only enough fuel to burn 16.
Yeah.
So you do kind of like have to think about which areas you're going to traverse the most. But the thing is, the Crimson Heads mechanic always kind of seems like a punishment for first-time players, because it wasn't in the original, so you kind of aren't expecting it. And when it comes up in the remake, you're thinking, oh my god, what is this? And it's only in subsequent plays that you realise, actually, I kind of don't want to be killing zombies as much as possible. Because then I'm going to get the Crimson Heads, but your first playthrough, you have no idea about that. So you're killing these zombies, and you think you're kind of like clearing the way.
That's true. But then again, if you're not killing zombies, you're still making things hard for yourself, because dodging zombies in this isn't particularly easy. You watch it in a speedrun and you think, oh, that's straightforward enough, but you actually try it and you'll get grabbed by the buggers. They're pretty grabby in this.
I've tried doing speedruns, and yeah, I'm useless at the dodging, personally. I can sometimes pull it off, but
I think in this game it's extremely punishing, because I did do a speedrun of Code Veronica, and it didn't seem anywhere near as difficult as in this to avoid getting grabbed. So I think this game might have an increased, grab percentage or whatever for the zombies.
It might be also down to the fact that the character sprites are quite a bit bigger in this than they are in Code Veronica.
Yeah, true.
But yeah, that Crimson Head mechanic does serve to punish kind of new players. Not punish, but introduce a level of challenge that you weren't expecting. And it just seems more of kind of a guide as to what not to do next time.
Yeah, that's true. But I don't think I would change the Crimson Heads at all, because I think that adds to the horrifying aspects of the game. Even on subsequent playthroughs, you're like, okay, I don't really want to be killing zombies because they'll come back. But I'd say that adds a whole, extra element of stress to it. Yeah, so I think the mechanic is still really good.
I do enjoy the mechanic, but like I said, just the way it was implemented just felt a little bit odd to me.
I don't know if you've ever, completed the game before and unlocked the extra modes.
Yes.
But speaking of extra difficulty, the difficulty modes that you unlock are really punishing. You get like one that, has this super zombie that chases you and kills you instantly. You've got one that makes all the zombies invisible. It really is for hardcore players, that game, because the game's not easy to begin with, and some of the extra modes are just silly.
I've seen speedruns of the invisible zombie mode. Some people really, really know that game super well.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
One thing I did want to ask, actually, is did you guys play as Chris or Jill?
I played as Jill.
I also played as Jill.
You see, I always play as Jill, but for this playthrough, I actually played through as Chris, just because I thought it was a good excuse to try something a little bit different. And Chris doesn't really start out particularly easy. I think he gets the short end of the stick. His inventory is tiny, and it just becomes a bit of a pain managing items and stuff.
I have played through it with Chris, but any subsequent playthroughs are always with Jill now.
Yeah, I tend to play as Jill, and I think I will do in future, just because I think Chris, even though he's quite a cool character, he's a bit more hassle than he's worth.
It's worth seeing it through just for the slightly different story elements. You meet up with Rebecca,
definitely.
who appeared in Resident Evil Zero as well, and you have slightly different story beats. It's all generally the same story. Jill is the easier character for a beginner, definitely.
I think anyone that doesn't pick Jill is just a bit of a show-off. And I think that anyone really should be picking Jill, who's, sensible.
Which is probably why every single speedthrough I've seen is with Chris.
Yeah, true. Bloody show-offs.
I can't help but notice that Ryan has been very quiet about this game. What was your thoughts about it?
I think he agrees with all the fantastic things we've been saying, so I don't think there's any need for further comment, maybe.
And now here comes the part where I shit on this game for as far as I got into it. I will start off, I do agree, I really, really enjoyed the atmosphere of the game. The background, the backdrops, all the rooms, the mansion in general, it's beautiful art. The setting is fantastic. The atmosphere, the suspense is fantastic. But when it boils down to the actual mechanics of the game, that's the real horror in the horror survival. It's just so clunky.
Do you mean the tank controls, or...?
I played it on the Xbone, and even then, the modern controls or the alternate controls are still really clunky and choppy. Some of the idea that you have to have your weapon raised to aim, or do you have to have your weapon aimed to reload?
I think it's both of them. You've got to ready your weapon and then fire, or ready and reload.
Yeah. And then you have to ready and reload. All your movement, even on alternate controllers, is based off of an 8-point. It's based off of an 8-point star. So there isn't actual 3D control, and this is probably because it started off on the PlayStation. You're locked on 8 different points to face. It's not a smooth gradient, which makes it some of the motion and aiming really awkward and clunky, and I ended up wasting so much ammo because I just wasn't quite pointing at the zombie and trying to reposition myself around and then hopping into the next room because I was just close enough to the border to get snapped around them. Now the camera's going everywhere and I can't see where the zombie is. It was just a nightmare from beginning until I finally gave up.
That's interesting. I've never really had that kind of issue, but I think it's because I used to play the games when I was younger. So I think it's one of those things where the controls are ingrained into me that I don't notice them anymore.
Quite possibly. I didn't play Resident Evil when I was a kid. This is actually the first time I've tried the first Resident Evil, and it was bad.
Yeah, I mean, this is my first Resident Evil experience ever.
I will probably say the most controversial thing that even I've ever said, and that's coming from, I know what I've said in the past, but Resident Evil the movie is better than Resident Evil the game.
Oh, wow.
That's pretty controversial. Yeah, I mean, I kind of get the issues with the controls because the controls are not easy. I think it's one of those things where if you haven't played games before with that control scheme, learning it now is going to be tough, especially now that you're used to, games with proper 3D movement and, proper 3D movement controls. So I do kind of see that.
But Stephen, you were also kind of like a newcomer to it. What did you think of the controls? Did you have similar issues?
I actually found that once I switched over to the modernized controls, I was fine. I think because I want to say I've played games with fixed cameras before, and it's just a matter of, say you're walking down a hall and the camera changes, whereas you were holding down to walk towards the camera. Now you're going away from the camera. If you continue to hold it, you'll still go that same direction.
Yeah.
And if you stop, then you have to press forward to continue down the hallway. That is very familiar to me. I don't know necessarily which game or games put that into me, but that particular setup is very familiar to me, and I've done that a lot. So,
could be adventure games, I think. Some of the old adventure games like Grim Fandango, I want to say, did things like that.
Yeah, but I haven't played any of those. That's why I'm wondering.
Have you not played any like old point and clicks where you could actually use, keyboard, not keyboard controls? Well, yeah, keyboard controls, I suppose, the directional arrows.
Now, the only old point and click adventure I played was Monkey Island.
Which are literally pointing and clicking.
Yeah.
All right.
So I'm very curious where I picked that up from, but because I do know that particular control scheme very well, even with fixed camera angles. So I think that's why I was able to cope with it more, because I'm more familiar with that setup.
It is essentially a form of tank control, just a slightly... you don't have to turn your entire character to turn around, but apart from that, it still does use that tank control where pressing in the direction to make your character move forward will continue to move your character forward in that direction.
Right.
Through camera changes, so it does take part of that design of the tank controls. So that might be why it feels a little bit familiar.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, maybe. It's a shame that you can get to grips with it, even with the modern controls, Ryan, because I think there's a really good horror game here, and I kind of feel sorry that you missed out on it. But
I super enjoy the atmosphere, and I wanted to like the game, but God help me, I couldn't.
Yeah, I guess it's like, Exhumed and Matt's experience with it. You know, if you're just not used to those controls, it can really affect your enjoyment of what is, a pretty good game.
I will say I got a good jump early on when, basically right after you come back and you find that one of your guys has been zombified, you get to Barry and you leave the dining room and you go to the main hall and you can open up the doors to the main hall. You can open up the main set of doors and there's a pack of dogs outside.
Yeah.
And I don't know what I was thinking, that wasn't going to happen, but I opened it up and it's like, oh shit.
Yeah.
I've made a terrible error.
So did any of you guys get to any of the bosses? I mean, obviously you have, Matt, but Steve, Ryan, did you end up getting to any of the bosses in there? Obviously the first boss is the snake.
Oh, heavens no, I couldn't get that far.
I got to the snake. I got to the Crimson Head prototype down
in the cellar?
Yeah, the one down in the graveyard.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I stopped.
Yeah, I got about that far in my playthrough as Chris, maybe a little bit further. I have been in the game before, but I didn't get amazingly far this time, just because I was getting sick of all the backtracking and stuff with my limited item space.
Yeah.
How far did you get, Ryan, before you gave up on it?
Oh, I don't even know. I kind of got lost and wandered around through a bunch of the doors and died a few times because the combat, again, with the controls were so clunky that getting good shots off on the zombies that were there, and the dog, the first time I opened up that door.
So you didn't make it to any of the bosses, then?
I did not even make it to the bosses. I was far too frustrated.
Nah, that's a shame.
With the clunkiness. I do wish that they would kind of remake this game in the era of Resident... And we'll do a not an HD upgrade, but rather a proper remake in the era of Resident Evil 4. And I do feel that would detract some from the game, but it would also just make it more accessible.
Well, it's interesting you saying that, because that's what they're doing with Resident Evil 2 in it.
Yeah,
I think so.
Pretty much. They're changing it into an over-the-shoulder camera style similar to Resident Evil 4.
Yeah, so maybe you'll kind of appreciate Resident Evil 2 remake more than the Resident Evil 1 remake.
Yeah, it was not a great experience.
All right, well, it's a shame. I mean, I think that Stephen, you got some enjoyment from it, and obviously Matt and I like it.
I know, and this is kind of the same opinion that I held with Silent Hill 2.
Yeah.
I appreciated it for what it was, but as far as a game that I would play, it's a big no. I would much prefer to watch someone, basically co-pilot if someone was playing.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that's fair enough. Right. Anyone else got anything to say before we move on?
Well, I was just going to say, if you're looking at getting the game yourself, it is released on pretty much all the modern systems, and as of the time of recording, a couple of days ago, it was announced for the Switch as well.
Yes, along with 0 and 4, I believe.
Yeah, so you can now get them, you'll soon be able to get them on the Switch as well.
So that makes Resident Evil 4 on almost every system known to man.
Yep, which I have it on almost every system known to man. I have 7 copies. I counted the other day. I have 7 copies of Resident Evil 4.
Nice. Well, hopefully that'll soon be 8 when the Switch version comes out.
I'm not sure if I'd buy it again an 8th time, but
You will when there's a sale. When there's a sale, I'm sure you'll think, well, go on then.
yeah, maybe.
Right, well, we'll take another break, and I think we'll go back to Stephen's pick.
My pick for this one was Parasite Eve, the RPG horror-ish game by Square. And the first time I booted this game up, I said, holy crap, I found the missing link between Final Fantasy 7 and 8. Because graphically it sits right between them, and it was released about in between the two games. It is an RPG, but it doesn't have the traditional active time battle RPG combat. Instead, it's more of a real-time combat, but it flows a little better than Square's other attempts at real-time combat. I thought the story was actually pretty good. It's an interesting idea, and I think they did a pretty good job with that. But, what did you guys think?
I've never found a game that both surprised me and disappointed me in equal measure so much as Parasite Eve. As an RPG, I wasn't expecting to like it, and my initial impressions were actually very good. From like the creature design and, like their morphing animations when you're actually seeing them become creatures was pretty neat. And as you mentioned with the combat, it's very different from a standard RPG. And I kind of liked it because you've got like this prism around you, and that's your attack range. And you've got like a charge meter to, before you can fire your weapon. And you can use that to kind of hit enemies. And then you can wander around, dodge their attacks and so on, and move about that way. And I feel that it flowed a lot better than a normal RPG. So yeah, my initial impressions were pretty good. My negatives, I'm going to leave off for a bit because I think that, at least one other person's probably going to have the same opinion as me. So I'll chip in a little bit later. But yeah, my initial impressions were quite good, and I did enjoy, it from a visual standpoint, and I definitely enjoyed the combat too. I don't know about you guys.
Visually, I found the game to be clean. Obviously, running static cameras, pre-rendered backgrounds, I felt it executed that better than Resident Evil did. Just how the movement flowed. The most interesting thing, I'm going to have to kind of join you, Adam, in that idea that I was surprised but not necessarily impressed. Mostly with the combat. When I entered combat, I went, oh boy, it's an RPG, and suddenly I had full freedom to move around. And that took me off guard. I wasn't anticipating. Because it almost sets up almost exactly like a Final Fantasy. You're standing here, here's the enemy, and I immediately expected all my little boxes and stuff to start up and to go, take your turn. And it didn't do that.
Here are random encounters, but I don't actually have to wait my turn.
Yeah, and that was freeing. It wasn't the most cleanly executed combat system, but it definitely took me off guard and not in a bad way.
It's definitely an improvement. Yeah.
Honestly, the thing this combat system reminds me the most of is Chrono Trigger. Because Chrono Trigger also had a system where you weren't just, lined up on either side of a field. You were actually in a space where you could move around, but I don't think you had full motion control. I think it was more that certain attacks would move you different ways, but you still, like this, had to actually make contact with the enemy to register a hit. So that's what it most reminds me of.
I've personally never played Chrono Trigger, so I have nothing really to base it on. But I did really, really enjoy the way the combat worked. Having to kind of like avoid the enemy attacks, which gets quite interesting on the boss fights as well. And then waiting for your attack bar to build up before you can actually perform an action, whether that be using a potion or shooting your gun or what have you. And it's the first time that I've seen a combat system like that. And it did kind of surprise me, and I did enjoy that kind of combat style.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of reminded me of the combat style from Panzer Dragoon Saga, because, it's more of an aerial combat type thing, but it's still a similar idea in that you have to wait until you can use, healing items or use certain attacks. And it works quite well and definitely gives it more of a freer approach to that kind of combat system. But I think that where the game fell down was the waiting, not necessarily in combat, but in cutscenes.
Yes.
And I feel that the game's not easy enough to justify long cutscenes that are unskippable and long gaps between, save points. Because if the game was really easy, fair enough. But the game does include points where you can quite easily die, even from random encounters, and then you have to basically go through endless cutscenes again and again, potentially. And I feel like the game is sort of obnoxious when it shouldn't be. I kind of think that it was a big oversight, and it kind of ruined my enjoyment of the game quite a lot.
Well, that particular issue wasn't one that I really came across because I was playing it on an emulator, and for whatever reason, the emulator that I was using, it wouldn't allow me to save the game in the normal way that you do the in-game saves. There's a phone and you pick it up, you make a call and report your progress back to HQ or whatever, and that saves your game. For some reason, my emulator wouldn't recognize any kind of emulated memory card, so I had to use the save state feature. So I didn't run into a problem where I was having to go back and watch these unskippable cutscenes. But the cutscenes were still really an issue for me, and I mean, we say the word cutscenes, they're not really cutscenes as such.
More like a fucking film.
Because you can't just put your controller down and watch it happen. You have to press your button after every single line of dialogue to advance to the next one. And when those go on for a really, really long period of time, that is just absolutely exhausting. I actually timed it once, and there was an hour where I had limited control of my character, and there was just a series of cutscenes. I had sort of control where I moved a little bit in the HQ, and then I went to the map, went to a different location, then there was a really long cutscene there, went to a different location, really long cutscene there, went to a different location, had to go to a gun shop, just a quick bit of searching around, a pharmacy, quick bit of searching around, then 2 more really long cutscenes. And it ended up being an hour just with that limited movement and no combat whatsoever. And it really, really annoyed me.
Yeah, I think that's one of the cardinal sins of RPGs for me, is that I don't think it tells stories in a very good way. There are some RPGs that do that, and they tell it, with minimal cutscenes, and they use the gameplay to kind of make things flow a little bit better and keep you interested. But a lot of them, it's just here's all this dialogue, or here's all this video, and you just kind of lose interest in a while. Especially when you're skipping lines of text, as you say, with the A button, because you get to a point where you're not reading it, you're just hammering the A button to get through it as fast as possible because you're sick of it. And it spoils the story, and you kind of lose interest in the story. And when stories are a big part of RPGs, I think it's kind of shooting itself in the foot.
I mean, the story is already quite convoluted as it is.
Yeah.
And having just these massive exposition dumps constantly do not help it at all.
Yeah, that is 100% a product of Square Enix and their, JRPG history, is they like to just do that. And I made the point to these guys before that for those of us that survived Kingdom Hearts and its unskippable cutscenes and Final Fantasy X and its absurdly long cutscenes, this doesn't bother us anymore because we've been through so much worse. I mean, I can tell you there's so many people out there that can quote word for word cutscenes from Kingdom Hearts because they happened right before a hard boss where they saw it hundreds of times.
Yeah, and I think that, admittedly, if you've played those games, it doesn't seem as bad, but that doesn't make it right. And
that's totally
I still
fair.
think they should have been there in the first place. I mean, I'm kind of interested to see how the second game plays out, though, even though I couldn't bring myself to finish the first. Because I hear that the second one's a lot more of an action-orientated game, so maybe that one's a little bit punchier and less bogged down in shit, but
And then the third one goes even further into action.
Yeah. I don't know. I've not played those ones or even seen much about them, but I would just hope so, because this first one, it kind of feels like it takes a good concept and a good action system, and it just kind of spoils itself and sort of ruins the game when it could potentially have been like really good. And I say that's where the disappointment came in from me. It surprised me by being a lot better than I thought it would be, but it still ruined itself for me, and in the end just disappointed what could have been a good game.
For me, it wasn't just the cutscenes as well, it was the combat. I said before, I really did enjoy the combat system quite a bit. I thought it was quite innovative and easy to use, intuitive, and then there was about 1,000 fights. And I got so fed up with it. You'd walk 5 feet and there'd be a fight. You'd walk to the next screen, there'd be a fight. You'd walk back to that first screen, you'd have the same fight. And
there's the other cardinal sin of JRPGs is constant random battles, which get to a point where you're moving 2 spaces before you're getting into another fight.
I mean, they're not really random as such in this particular game. They do seem to be exactly the same.
Yeah, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. It gives the illusion of random fights, but I do think it is actually triggered when you hit a certain point in a room.
Yeah, it's the specific square, so to speak, on the screen is what triggers it. And like you said, it is, that spot will always trigger that same fight. And that was another case where, I was at a point where I was looking for fights and not getting them as often as I thought I should.
Because you were walking on the different squares.
Well, not even that. It's just that, I'm so used to this kind of system that it didn't seem to be too much. It seemed like it was not enough. But that's, totally down to my difference of experience. It's the same. It's
like the cutscene thing.
Yeah, it's the same with the tank controls from Resident Evil, where, I struggled because I'd never dealt with it before. But you guys that grew up with this didn't have any problems.
Yeah, true. But I kind of feel those constant fights get a little bit exhausting. But I suppose I say, like yourself, who are quite, familiar and used to those things, it's just like, yeah, it's fine. It's nothing too much. But then again, as I've mentioned before, I quite like the Pokemon games, and in every single one of those games, water and caves are just way too much with encounters, and I have to repel through them. And because I've played those games countless times, you'd have thought I'd be used to it, but I still despise them, and for me it gets worse every time rather than better.
That's what I was going to say. If anything, it's worse the more you play games that have random encounters.
Yeah.
That was one of the things I loved about Super Mario RPG is there aren't any random encounters that I know of. There's a couple where an enemy will run out of nowhere and slam into you, but all of the rest of them, you have control if you want to fight or not.
Well, continuing that divergence for just a minute, there is another RPG which I've played, which I don't love because I don't care about RPGs much, but it does random encounters rather well, because there are basically like a set number of random encounters per area. So it basically gives you, say, 12 random encounters in a dungeon. And then at that point, there'll be no more. But if you go into the menu, you can just press the button where you can just force an encounter. So if you need extra experience, you can get into a fight. And I kind of feel like that's quite a good way of doing it, because you get to a point where you've got enough battles to have the experience where you should be, But if you wanted more experience to grind out a little bit more, you can.
That sounds kind of similar to The World Ends With You, where you've got a set number of the little icons on screen to activate for the encounters.
Yeah. I don't know which one came first. This one's quite old. But I think it's a good approach where it's just like, here's your random encounters, but we're not going to do it, till the end of time. We're going to give up after a while, and you can just get them if you want.
But is there a reason that these games have to have random encounters at all? I mean,
experience, I suppose.
Why not have the creatures actually in the world, and you can choose to fight them if you want to, or just avoid them if you don't?
Yeah,
it's like the new Pokemon game where you can see them in the grass, and I suppose you can just avoid them if you want.
Square didn't get to that point until, I think, 12. Final Fantasy 12 is when they had the monsters you could see on the overworld.
It's probably just a case of someone did it, it worked, and people just continued doing it, I suppose. Yeah. I don't think it was ever really a good system.
Yeah, I think a lot comes down to people, especially Square, for a while stuck to tradition so hard rather than innovating. And it just so happened that there were so many people that wanted exactly that thing that they made, millions. And when they finally did decide to try and change things, people complained because they were changing.
Yeah, but I suppose that's how people are.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my experience with the game was a mixed bag. I can't say I hated it. I would say I hated it more because it was so close to being good. But then things like the large number of encounters, the long cutscenes and stuff like that, I just kind of think spoiled the overall game for me when it shouldn't have done. What about you guys? Did you have a better experience than I did?
I mean, I was enjoying myself, but I was emulating using the PCSXR, which is for Mac because my machine that had Windows on it sort of self-imploded, and it was a very wonky, unstable time. So I think if I actually played, it proper type, I would enjoy it more, other than, again, the aforementioned drawn-out cutscenes and, quite honestly, rather uninteresting dialogue. But what I got out of this was, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and you were saying that the second and even third games get a little bit more action-oriented. I think I would enjoy those even more.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on whether they do the same kind of things. I mean, there might be more action, but that just might be like more encounters.
Right,
I don't know. So it depends on how they do it.
I know the third game was very, very different, to the point where a lot of people don't even know it's the same series.
All right, well, it'll be interesting to check it out, and maybe it'll be better.
It might be.
All right, well, has anyone else got anything to say about it before we move on?
No, I think I'm definitely going to, go back and finish this up because I did really, really enjoy this game. I didn't know what I was going to get into going in, and, I'm excited to try out the rest of them now.
I really, really wanted to love the game, but the game did not want me to.
Yeah, I think I have the same opinion as Matt. All right, so with that out of the way, let's move on to our final pick, which is Ryan's pick. Let's take another break and rejoin in just a moment.
My pick for our Halloween special was Metroid Fusion. Developed for the Game Boy Advance in 2002, it was the fourth installment of the core Metroid series. I don't recall if Prime came out before or after. They were released really, really close to each other.
They were in more or less the same period. I know there's a certain degree of connectivity between the two. Like you can get content from one into the other. So I would say more or less the same time, if I was to hazard a guess. So,
literally, they were released a day apart. The Metroid series as a whole was heavily inspired by Aliens, or Alien. and that would be Ridley Scott's Alien movie or franchise. And the whole idea was just isolation, a really dangerous environment, slow progression, and the Metroid games are in their core a survival horror, though a lot of them are a lot more tedious than they seem. But Metroid Fusion really nailed down the concept of survival horror for a Metroidvania title.
What's quite interesting as well is that this one, as you say, was very kind of horror-based, but then Metroid Prime, which came out at the same time, was like the complete opposite. It removed all horror from the series.
Yeah, there was almost no horror. There was almost no jump scares. It just sort of happened. I mean, you had some alien monsters in Prime, but like in Fusion, you had some horrible monsters.
Yeah, you're not kidding.
I think I know what you're getting at there, Adam.
Yeah.
But basically, the concept is there's a space station. Samus, our protagonist, leaves. She comes back, or she has to come back. There's been a mass infection of the space station. Essentially, everybody's dead, and you have to go fight a completely unknown enemy that is insanely deadly and can assume the form of literally any organic life it comes in contact with, which also happened to be you. So, I mean, I don't want to put too many spoilers down, but the game does a really good job of making you feel completely helpless initially.
Yeah.
And there's a lot less combat going on versus a lot of running and hiding. They do that constantly throughout the game.
You kind of say about there not being that much combat. It doesn't make the game any easier. I think one of the ways that the game makes things quite stressful on you is that the game is quite difficult. I would say that it's possibly the most difficult Metroid game. I mean, barring the first one.
Yeah, barring the first one. If you want to start off with like Metroid Zero Mission and counting that as the first one.
Yeah, I mean, you can't compare it to a NES game because those games are notorious for being punishing. But
it's either going to be Fusion or Echoes. It has one of the more extreme difficulty curves.
Yeah.
Just like any other Metroid game, eventually you hit a point where you're just mowing through everything.
Yeah. But I suppose that's similar with the genre. I mean, we mentioned this with Symphony of the Night. You just get to a point where you get all the upgrades and you're just killing everything with no effort.
But Fusion did a really good job as you get farther on. Like, even when you're super powerful and you have like these crazy missiles and you're running a better suit and you have you have all these crazy upgrades.
Yeah.
Bosses will still wipe you out real fast if you're not careful.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think the bosses are really tough.
And you'll enter a new part of the station with an enemy you haven't seen, and they'll just coming in contact then, you'll get wiped out.
Yeah. They're not the easiest of bosses. Like, I think most of them are pretty difficult. Like, even the early bosses are quite easy to get killed by, especially if it's your first time playing.
I would say the only boss in the game that isn't super deadly is probably the one that gives you the morph ball or the morph ball bombs. It's the big roly-poly one.
Yeah.
And after that, they start getting more and more difficult.
Yeah, definitely. What's interesting as well, I mean, you mentioned that you didn't want to go into spoiler territory, but fuck it, I am. The game's really old.
You had your 20 years almost going on it.
Exactly. If not, then skip ahead maybe a minute or two and you'll avoid it. But another interesting similarity with Metroid Prime and this is the introduction of a clone. Mm-hmm. Because you've got the SAX, which is the Samus Aran X, or the Sax as I like to call her, just because it sounds completely not threatening at all. And then obviously you've got Dark Samus in the Metroid Prime games. Mm-hmm. And it's quite interesting that, you've got both of these kind of parallel evil Samuses running side by side. And, without giving too much away, they both kind of have a very similar story arc, I suppose, if you count in the whole Metroid Prime trilogy. I won't go into more details than that because I know that, Stephen and Matt haven't played the Metroid Prime games.
Right.
So I want them to kind of experience how that unfolds. But you kind of get what I'm getting at, at least Ryan, in terms of, like, the games are sort of similar in many ways, and in other ways they're completely different. I don't know why. It's just, I just find it interesting.
I've never actually really thought about that parallel, but Yeah. I like to describe Fusion as the good Alien Isolation. For those who are aware of the more recent game, Alien Isolation.
Alien Isolation? Do you mean the Alien Infestation? Infestation's a DS game. Isolation was the one with a single alien about the spaceship.
Yeah, that was the one that was released like 2, maybe 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I think it was 2 years ago. And it's a very...
You like that game?
I thought it had some better points in it, like it could have been executed better, but it's a similar idea where you have a thing that you can't really fight.
Yeah.
There are things you can fight, but the biggest threat you always have to avoid.
Yeah,
And
like
it's
Dark
and
Samus
it's
you're just running from.
and it's and it's funny that I would say it's Alien Isolation, but better, or it's Nintendo's Alien Isolation, even though it predated it by 15 years.
Yeah.
Because again, the Metroid series was inspired by Alien.
Yeah.
So we've come full circle. But what did you all think?
Personally, I really enjoyed it from the start. Having discovered Castlevania Symphony of the Night this year and immediately getting a spot in my top 5 games of all time, this seemed quite similar in terms of like the exploration and the gameplay style. I found it shared a lot of similarities with that, so I was really getting into it. I actually had an issue though with, as you guys have mentioned earlier, the bosses are really difficult, and I could not get past the second boss. So as much as I actually wanted to play through this game, and I was enjoying it up to that point, I cannot get any further. I have tried, and I must have tried for about half an hour to defeat that second boss, and I just couldn't do it. So it's probably going to have to be watching a playthrough for me.
You know what? I would actually say with that, it's worth getting the game on emulator and trying to scum state your way through it just so you can play the rest of it. Because I think that you do need to experience the game yourself. Even if you have to play an emulated version so you can, kind of save scum it, I still think it's definitely worth going through yourself rather than watching a playthrough. Just to get that full experience of it. Especially as Ryan says, there's a lot of the game where you're running away from this, the big threat, and you have to run away and basically find a hiding space in order to escape. And that kind of thing I don't think would be as thrilling with just a standard, let's play. So I would recommend against that, because it's only the second boss. Just start the game again and use, Visual Boy Advance and go through it that way. I think that would definitely be a better way of doing it.
I think the eShop version on the Wii U has some form of save states.
It probably does. Okay. In that case, that's another option if you don't want to emulate.
Well, I mean, I was playing it on the Retron 5, which does have save states. But I just could not avoid getting hit by that by the second boss.
The second boss, is that the big...
It's the big tall thing that jumps about.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
You've got to go underneath it when it's spreading its legs just before it lands on you, fire a missile or two upwards, and get out of the way, and then just keep on doing that.
Oh no, sorry, it's third boss.
Which one's the third boss? Is that the big metal boxy spider thing?
No, it's kind of the bottom half of a leg with an eye in the knee. That is the best way I can describe it.
That's the boss I'm talking about. I think that is
right.
like the second proper boss. It jumps up and like its little foot parts, its toes, spread apart, and then it stomps down on you.
Yeah.
And that's where you've got to shoot upwards. So you've basically got to get underneath it and shoot a missile or, perhaps two, but I'd probably just use one and then just run out of the way. And then just basically keep on repeating that. I mean, it's a slow way of doing it, but that's probably the safest way, is just to get underneath, shoot one up quickly, and then run out of the way.
I wasn't able to line up the shots properly at all.
Yeah, you have to be pretty precise or they sort of bounce off. The same thing happens on the boss Arachnus, which I think is the third or fourth boss. If you don't hit him there's a certain point where you don't hit him right, it just bounces off him for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the bosses are pretty hardcore, I remember when I first played it, I used to have trouble with the, I think it's called box. You fight him like a couple of times, like the big boxy spider thing. But then that was nothing compared to like later on in the game.
Are you talking about the security bot?
Yeah, the security bot is the one that I had trouble with at first. But
Yeah.
the big one, do you know which one I'm going to talk about? The one that I think's like the hardest.
Oh, yes. The infamous Nightmare.
Yep.
And such a well-named boss on all levels.
So he's got lasers. He's got like this charge beam thing that he fires. And he basically mucks around with gravity a lot. You have to basically get as high as you can and aim precise missiles at him. But it's really hard to do because of all the gravity changing and the way he flies and how much damage he deals. It's really difficult to take down this boss, and even though I've beaten the game a few times now, I always come to a halt with him and have to just do him again and again and again.
I was going to say, my original challenge for this game was to beat Nightmare in one sitting, and I'm thinking, that's really hard. Even I haven't done a playthrough of the game and beat him the first time I encountered him. I always die at least once.
Yeah, but he's sort of well done because it's strange because the more you hit him, his face starts to like sag, like it's melting.
Yeah,
and he eventually gets to a point where his face is just dripping off its body, and
it's pretty horrible.
It is pretty horrible. I mean, this is a Game Boy Advance game, but it's pretty horrific, and it really does live up to the name because he is a nightmare. So much so that I would say that he's even more difficult than Ridley, because Ridley obviously makes an appearance in this game because, of course he does.
Of course he does.
But he's not actually that bad.
Well, no, I was going to say, kind of, wandering off topic slightly, but I do appreciate that you do all these fights and all the bosses have their gimmicks. Like you have to wait for the spider to, move to a certain point and avoid his little fireballs and shoot him in the mouth, and then you have to avoid the little giant roly-poly bug and shoot him in the face, and they have all these patterns, and then you get to Ridley, and it's just an all-out brawl.
It is, because, he doesn't even have a weak point or anything. It's just like...
He doesn't. You just
hit him anywhere.
You just have to dump like 180 missiles into him.
But he has a special attack, and that attack is probably the thing that's going to get you the most.
Is that the fireball, or is it... I'm trying to remember. It's been so long since I've actually gotten far enough to...
It's his scream.
Fight Ridley.
No, it's his scream.
Oh, yeah.
The high-pitched scream that almost deafens you and kind of knocks you off your game. And you're just like, holy shit. You have to turn the volume down, otherwise you're going to have a rough time. Because it's just like, wah!
Headphone users, rest in peace.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Or if you're playing it using the Game Boy player on the
Oh, yeah, loud as hell on your TV.
Hope you've not got surround sound. Christ.
Yeah, right.
But all in all, I think the game is really good. To give you an idea of how much I like the game, I prefer it to Super Metroid. And people say Super Metroid's a masterpiece, which, it is a really good game.
Yeah,
but I always enjoy playing Fusion.
But I would say that Fusion is just a little bit more masterpiece-ier.
Yeah. I'd say that the bosses are really, really difficult, but, because the game goes for that kind of horror atmosphere, I'd say it kind of adds to it.
And
because, again, like with the Crimson Heads in Resident Evil, it just makes the game a little bit more stressful.
Mm-hmm. And and visually, like, I'm hoping that we can all agree that it's a good-looking game.
And sounding as well. I think the atmospheric music in the background is pretty good too.
I found it very bright and colourful. Even though it is a horror game, it has a good use of colour.
Versus a lot of modern horror games, which are just sort of mute brown and greys.
Yeah.
Especially on the Game Boy Advance as well, because the GBA is pretty old and it's not exactly the most powerful of systems.
I did find out that the GBA is actually a 32-bit system, though.
Really?
I didn't know it was that powerful. Like, its processors, and it's weird because it's not technically as powerful as the Super Nintendo was, but it has a much larger palette.
All right. That's very interesting. I never realized that.
Trivia right there.
Nice one. Thank you very much for that.
I really liked the game. I mean, for a lot of reasons you guys said. I made it a good ways in, but yeah, I thought it was a really good game. I kind of, like Matt, kind of discovered I was into this style with Symphony of the Night. So getting to play this one, and this was my first Metroid experience as well. So I actually was very pleased with my experience.
I know you have said in the past you're not fond of platformers.
Right, but this one, like...
I think it's like Symphony of the Night, where it's more of an exploration type game. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not about the platform challenges. It's about getting items and exploring the different areas, which I suppose is sort of like an RPG kind of trait in a way.
Just a tiny bit.
I think it's all in how the platforming is presented, and this is much more my speed rather than basically the stage full of bottomless death pits, as opposed to platforms that you need to navigate to get through this room.
Right, you're not racing. It's not Super Mario Bros. You're not racing a clock.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, I don't think Symphony of the Night did it either. You don't get in situations where, like, if you drop into the wrong spot, you're just going to die. Like, even in a boss room. Like, you'll take some damage, but you're not just like, well, too bad, try again.
Yeah, definitely.
Except for the clock tower in Symphony of the Night, Jesus. That's such an annoying room.
Oh my god, those Medusa heads. You get hit by one, it's just constant.
And that's why you wear that one armor that makes you immune to stoning.
Yeah.
What is that actually a thing?
Yeah, there's an armor.
Is it
that
an
makes
armor
you,
or is it an amulet?
I'm pretty sure it's an armor that makes you immune to stone, so you can't be petrified at all.
That would have been fantastic because I hate the clock tower so much.
I think it's the mirror.
Yes, I think it is. I don't remember the English name, but that does ring a bell, so I think you're right.
Do you still get the knockback?
You will, but the thing is, if you get knocked back, you'll probably land on something. And the worst thing in the clock tower is you get petrified, you land on a cog or something, and then you fall off it because of the cog moving. So
yeah, the mirror curious makes a protection against stone, and this even says making it extremely useful when tackling either version of the clock tower.
But it still depends on whether you've got it or not.
I think I did actually have that. That rings a bell, but I didn't know that it. Ah, well, never mind.
Yeah. That's one of the things that you pick up as you play, and then future playthroughs are a bit less stressful.
Yeah.
But yeah, Metroid Fusion, going back to that, pretty good game in my opinion.
It sets as my favorite of the Metroid series.
It's not my favourite of the Metroid series, and I wouldn't even say it's my favourite of the 2D Metroids, because I do really like Zero Mission a lot. But I would say it's definitely a close second for the 2D ones.
I enjoyed what I was able to play.
Yeah, so if you can go and save scum a couple of the bosses, because I not only suggest but wholly condone save scumming Nightmare if you ever get that far.
I would say even with like the earlier bosses, just save scum if you need to, because if the only other option is to watch like a Let's Play or something, I would say that with this game you would lose a fair bit in some of the sequences just because of the tension involved.
Yeah.
That I would say, with that one boss, try and get one hit in without getting hit, save state, and just keep doing that until he's dead.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I played Fusion, and I got to when the SAX enters the room and you're forced to run. Like the first encounter you had, because that happened several times.
Yeah.
And it was... I had no idea what I was supposed to do. And, because earlier on, the computer suggests, hey, if you encounter the SAX, just run, it'll kill you. But, when it actually happens...
you really do have to follow that advice.
You really have to haul ass.
Yeah.
Because it's not like, this is just a scripted thing, just do what you want and you'll escape. You really have to go for it.
And there's one room, I think it's probably around halfway through the game, where you enter in an area and the SAX is walking below you. You're in the ceiling and the SAX is walking through the hall below you. And if you drop down too soon, it'll sip around and go after you, and you're fucked at that point.
Yeah.
And I've done that once or twice, just going in my whole thing like this. I can go now. No, you can't.
Yeah.
Well, there's one where you actually have to bomb your way out of a room, and the game actually baits you. It's like, this square can only be destroyed with your super bomb, but the super bomb will draw its attention, and you'll get wrecked.
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely something you have to play through. Okay, well, since we've gone through our opinion on all 4 games, I think it's time to take a quick breather, and then we'll choose our favourite. And then later on, we have a little surprise in store. Okay, so with those 4 games out of the way, let's choose our favourite. Matt, do you want to start? What was your pick for this month?
Well, I would have gone with Resident Evil. Obviously, I can't pick my own game. Out of the other 3, I'd have to say Metroid Fusion. It just had that kind of Symphony of the Night feel to it, which I really enjoyed. And even though I did get stuck and did find the difficulty curve a little bit too hard, I would still say that was my pick of those 3.
Yeah, I definitely say keep with it and try and get to the end.
Yeah,
it's definitely worth it, especially some of the later parts of the game, as we mentioned before. What about you, Stephen? What was your pick?
This one was actually tough for me because, as I said, I played the Resident Evil remake, so I actually had a very positive experience with that. I don't know. I think in the end I have to go with Metroid Fusion. I think I just enjoyed that one a little bit more, but I'm still going to go back and finish, both of those games because they were both a really good time.
So have you beaten Metroid Fusion before?
No, I have not. This was actually my first time playing it.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, you definitely need to beat that as well. Same as with Matt, it's definitely worth seeing through to the end. Personally, as I mentioned before, I actually prefer it to Super Metroid, and that should give you an indication of its quality.
Yeah, that's high praise.
Yeah, definitely. Right, Ryan, what about you?
I gotta say, because I can't pick my own game, my favorite this time was Exhumed or Power Slave. I just have a soft spot for Doom clones. It was hard as hell, but I just really, I don't know, I just like the aesthetic. I like everything about it. Even if you can pick it apart and go, some things aren't a great game, I still enjoyed it.
That's fair enough.
Well, I'm glad you picked my game. I'm glad someone enjoyed it. Right, for me, it was a really tough pick. Choosing between Metroid Fusion and the Resident Evil remake. Both of those are really stellar games. The Resident Evil remake in particular was one that I actually had growing up, and it actually more or less introduced me to the Resident Evil series. I'd played a bit of Resident Evil 4 prior, but then the Resident Evil remake was my introduction to like the classic formula of the tank controls and everything. And I think it's brilliant. The atmosphere, what they did to the game to improve it, it's just a masterpiece. That being said, Metroid Fusion is really, really good. And I don't think it really gets the praise it should. Normally it's Super Metroid that gets all the Metroid love when it comes to the fan base. But I think Metroid Fusion deserves that love a little bit more. So I'm going to go for Metroid Fusion as well. Right, okay, so with those out of the way, we'll take a quick break and we'll move on to a special quiz that Matt's organised for us. This will be exciting. See you after the break.
Okay, as Adam said, I've put together a quiz for Halloween. Being a big fan of all things horror, I decided to put together this horror retro game quiz to test the horror knowledge of the other 3 guys. Now, I know none of you guys are really all that into horror, so I've tried to make it moderately easy. There might be 1 or 2 questions here that might trip you up, but we'll see how you get on. So, if we are ready, we will start with question 1, which is
It's a good place to start.
an easy one to start off with. Question 1. In the original Resident Evil, who is the Master of Unlocking? And we'll start with Stephen first.
I have absolutely no clue.
Okay, Ryan?
Is his title the Master of Unlocking?
This character is referred to as the Master of Unlocking.
Oh, the farthest I've gotten into it, I'm just going to guess it's Barry, because he gives you a lockpick.
Okay, Adam?
Well, Ryan was very close. Barry does give you a lockpick, but that's because you're the Master of Unlocking, so it's Jill who's the Master.
Ah, okay.
Yep, that's right. So 1 point to Adam there. That's got me worried, actually, because I thought that was one that you'd all get. So I'll...
Well, okay, you have to remember this was my first time playing Resident Evil.
And I've played Resident Evil quite a few times. And I think as well, that's only in the original. I think they changed the dialogue in the remake.
Yeah, the remake doesn't have that. So that might be why it was a little bit tricky. This next one's a little bit tricky as well. Question 2. In Silent Hill, Harry befriends a nurse. What is her name? I'll ask Ryan first.
I'm going to pass on this one.
Okay, Adam?
It's annoying because I know this. Nurse. Oh, shit. And I think as well, she's actually in the Silent Hill film, or at least a character with the same name. For some reason, I'm thinking of something beginning with J, but I might be going down the wrong path. I don't know, Judy. That's just a guess, and I know it's wrong. But it's an answer where you're going to tell me, and I'm going to kick myself.
Stephen?
Nope, no idea.
Okay, the nurse's name is Lisa Garland.
Oh, of course it fucking is. Never mind.
I think I might actually lose this quiz.
I think it's the first quiz you'll have lost.
I guess I'm fine with it then.
So, question 3. Before making Resident Evil, Shinji Mikami created which horror game for the Famicom? Adam first.
Now that's thrown me off, because I was thinking that he made the Devil May Cry series, but I think that was after.
That was after.
Yeah.
For the Famicom.
Mm-hmm.
Was it one that was Japan only? Can you
Yes.
give that clue? It was. I want to say something like Sweet Home or something like that, or Something Home, which seems to ring a bell, because I remember there being like a Japanese horror game called that, which was very kind of survival horror-y, but that's as close to the title as I can get, because I don't really remember the name of it.
Okay, no worries. Stephen?
Nope.
And Ryan?
My Famicom knowledge is very non-existent, so...
Yeah, mine too. It's just periphery stuff.
Adam actually did get that one right. It is called Sweet Home, and it served as the inspiration for Resident Evil. Okay, question 4. What is the name of the main player character in the original Castlevania game? Stephen first.
Simon Belmont.
And Ryan?
Yeah, it's Simon Belmont.
And Adam.
Yep, King of the Belmont, Simon Belmont.
Okay, that's right. A point for everyone there. Question 5. Which game by Infogrames is commonly referred to as the first survival horror game? Ryan.
Infogrames. I'm not even familiar with that developer, so I do not know.
Okay, Adam?
Well, I'm not entirely sure if it's Infogrames or not, but I remember thinking that Alone in the Dark was normally referred to as the first one. Although I think that's Atari, but I don't know if it was like Infogrames back then. So I'm going to say Alone in the Dark.
Okay, Stephen?
I recognize the name Infogrames. I can't think of what it is.
Okay, well, Adam was right. It is actually Alone in the Dark. Infogrames was the developer. Atari published it.
I'd say I kind of vaguely remember Alone in the Dark being known as the first one, but I was just thinking that's Atari.
I know that Resident Evil is often called the first survival horror game, or it was the first game to coin the term.
Or maybe it was the first one to kind of make it good, because, the original Alone in the Dark games are a little bit ropey.
Yeah.
And
Well, you get that with a lot of old games.
Yeah.
I mean, hell, modern Alone in the Dark games are garbage.
To be fair, Alone in the Dark 2 was actually alright, but it's not the best mechanically. I've not played the first one, I've only played the second one, and the controls are garbage. But it's an okay game.
Okay, question 6. In the Fatal Frame - Project Zero series, what is your main weapon to fight ghosts? Adam.
I know nothing about the Fatal Frame series because I've never played one, but I do know that you use a camera, and I think it's all about taking photographs. So I'm pretty sure your main weapon will be the camera, because I think that's the central gimmick.
Okay, Stephen.
Yeah, it's the camera.
Ryan?
Yeah, it's the camera. That's the whole gimmick of Fatal Frame.
Yep, you're all right. You have a spirit camera to
It's
fight the ghosts.
basically a Ghostbusters trap, except a camera.
Okay, so question 7. The LucasArts game, Day of the Tentacle, is the sequel to which early horror game? Stephen?
I should know this given how much I love LucasArts, but I don't.
Ryan?
I actually do know this one, but I can't remember. No. It's Manic Mansion. I think it's the sequel to Manic Mansion.
Okay, Adam?
I think I know this, but I'm starting to doubt whether I know the title wrong. I've not played either of them, but I'm sure it's a sequel to Maniac Mansion.
It is Maniac Mansion. I will give a point to Ryan there as well, because
It was near enough.
You were on the right track. You were close enough there. Okay, question 8. Arguably, the 3 biggest horror movie franchises of the 80s were Halloween, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Friday the 13th. Which one didn't receive a game adaptation for the NES? Ryan?
I want to say it was Halloween didn't get an adaptation.
Okay, Adam?
I'm wanting to say Nightmare on Elm Street, but I don't know. I'm pretty sure Friday the 13th did get one, and then the other two I'm not sure, so I'm going to say Nightmare on Elm Street.
Stephen?
It was Halloween.
Yep, it was indeed Halloween. Point to Stephen and Ryan there. There was an Atari game of Halloween, but there wasn't an NES one.
And I know that because the Friday the 13th game was infamous for being impossible, and A Nightmare on Elm Street is one that is actually on my list to be covered in this show.
Yeah, I believe your American exclusive one, isn't it?
Yes.
Question 9. Roberta Williams, the creator of the King's Quest series, made a horror game using full motion video in 1995. What was it called? Adam?
I'm going to take a guess. I have absolutely no idea who this person is, and the only full motion video thing I can think of is Phantasmagoria, so I'm going to say that's it, just because it's the only full motion thing I can think of that's horror.
Stephen?
I should know this because I've actually looked this up before, but I can't remember.
Okay, Ryan?
I have no clue.
No, okay, well, a point to Adam there. It was actually Phantasmagoria. Okay, question 10. Which legendary composer created the music for most of the Silent Hill games? Stephen?
His last name is Yamaoka. I just can't remember his first name.
Okay, Ryan?
The only composers I'm going to give you were for Nintendo games, so I have no clue.
Adam?
Yeah, I was thinking Yamaoka, so Shinji him. I can't pronounce Japanese names, but what Steven says, but with Shinji in front.
I will give you both a point for getting the second name right. His name is actually Akira Yamaoka.
That's right.
Yeah. I could remember the Yamaoka like Steven, but first name, no idea.
Tim Yamaoka.
Tim. Brian.
He's also made some very, very strange pop music, which I have a CD of.
I think I've actually heard about that before.
He actually did the music for Shadows of the Damned, too.
Yes, he did, because Shadows of the Damned, didn't it get like a few people, like the Resident Evil developer, the Silent Hill musician?
It was Shinji Mikami, Akira Yamaoka, and Suda51.
Yeah. And it was a damn good game. It's a shame that was on the 360, because I won't mind covering that. Never mind.
Question 11. Which 80s John Carpenter horror movie was turned into a video game in 2002 for PC, PS2, and Xbox? Ryan?
I don't even know who that is.
You what?
Yep.
Good work.
Okay, Adam?
I'm just going to say The Thing, because it's the only John Carpenter thing I can think of at the moment.
Okay, Stephen?
I was actually going to guess The Thing as well.
Yep, you're right. It was The Thing.
What other big John Carpenter things are there? Because off the top of my head, is Halloween John Carpenter?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Attack on Precinct 13.
Really, when I think of John Carpenter, I always think of John Carpenter's The Thing, because that's how they, preface the movie title.
Right.
But when it comes to other films like Halloween, I don't think of it as, John Carpenter's Halloween. It's just Halloween.
Escape from
Yeah,
New York as well was him.
Yeah, I know all those films, but I just can't picture John Carpenter in front of it. Did he only put his name in front of the thing, or was...
Yes, I think so, because it was a remake of
That's-
the
Yeah.
earlier film, so that's probably why he put his name in front of that.
Yeah,
That's
because
probably
it's
the
such
reason.
a-
That's why the only film that I can think of that is allocated to his name.
I'm just such a non-horror buff that a lot of these things fly under my radar.
Question 12. In Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which city do the witches come from? Adam.
You bastard! You were saying Symphony of the Night, and I was like, yes. And then you're like, what city? And I went, no, because the one that I'm familiar with is the Japanese version, and I don't speak Japanese.
right.
So, I'm sure that if I was more familiar with the English version, because I've only played that one time, then I might be more familiar. I'm just going to say Transylvania or something like that, just because I'd... Oh, wait, no. It might have been the same city as the place that was in Lords of Shadow, and I can't remember the town name. Shit, no, I'm going to have to pass. I'm sure it's the name of the town that's in Lords of Shadow as well, but I can't remember it.
Okay, Stephen.
It's not Ipswich, is it?
Ipswich. We'll move on to Ryan, I think.
Lovely.
If it's the witch I'm thinking of, it's Salem, isn't it? Because there's Salem witches.
Yep, it is. It is indeed Salem witches. They are called Salem witches in the game.
Okay.
I never realised that, because I was going off the wrong track. I was thinking with the Lords of the Shadow series, because there's an actual town that's made up for that universe. I didn't realise it'd just be Salem. It's quite an obvious choice, really. Never
So
mind.
yeah, just a point to Ryan there then.
Oh my god.
Question 13. I think I may have made this one a little bit too hard, to be fair. Which 3D game for the ZX81
Fucking hell.
featured a Tyrannosaurus Rex as the main enemy? Stephen.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Ryan?
I have no clue.
Adam?
I don't know what the fuck a ZX81 is.
It's like the precursor to the ZX Spectrum.
Alright, yeah. If I was to picture a ZX81, I'd have to just picture a Spectrum, because I have no fucking clue what it even is. So I'm going to guess Jurassic Park, because it's got dinosaurs.
This was actually 3D Monster Maze, and it was one of the first home computer 3D horror games.
You know what? I have actually heard of that game. That name does actually ring a bell.
Okay, so question 14. What is the name of Capcom's dinosaur survival horror series? Ryan.
Oh shit, I'm going to kick myself when I hear this one. I can't remember, but I know what it is. I know what it is.
No, you don't want to have a guess?
Oh, shit, I can't.
Okay.
I
Adam?
can't think of it.
It's a game I never played for a long time, and I actually played a couple of years back, and it was fantastic. I hope we actually cover it at some point. I believe that's Dino Crisis.
Okay, Stephen.
I was going to say Dino Crisis 2.
It is Dino Crisis.
Yep. Point for Stephen and Adam there. It is Dino Crisis. Okay, so one more question left. Question 15. Doom was initially released as shareware with the entire first episode available for free. What was the name of that first episode? Adam.
Shit. I know episode 4 is Thy Flesh Consumed. Episode 1... Fuck, I don't remember. What the fuck is episode 1 called? This is something I should know, because I have played Doom countless times, but I never really pay any attention to the episode titles for some reason, apart from episode 4. It's one of those ones I'm going to kick myself when I hear it, so I'm going to pass.
Okay, Stephen.
It's not On the Shores of Hell, is it?
I think that's episode 2.
Okay.
That does sound familiar, though. It could be right.
Okay, Ryan.
I want to say it's also... I got to get this because I actually like Doom. I'm not like a huge fanatic, but I do enjoy Doom. Yeah, Knee Deep in the Dead.
Shit.
It is indeed Knee Deep in the Dead.
Of course it is.
1 point for Ryan there.
On the Shores of Hell, is that episode 2?
That's episode 2.
It is episode 2.
And I think Thy Flesh Consumed is episode 3 or 4.
Thy Flesh Consumed is 4 in it.
Yeah, it's 4. It wasn't part of the original game. That was a bonus
Extra.
episode that you got with Ultimate Doom.
And episode 3, what was that called?
Something Inferno, I think. Off the top of my head, I don't remember.
Oh, it's just Inferno. Okay.
Alright. That's a bit of an anticlimax. Never mind.
So, totaling up the scores,
Oops.
Stephen and Ryan are in joint second place with 6 points, and Adam is in first place with 10 points. So, well done, Adam.
Thank you very much. I was quite surprised that I wouldn't know anything, but... All right, cool. Well, thank you very much, Matt. That was a very fun quiz. I enjoyed that.
I got way more points than I thought I was ever going to get.
I was actually quite surprised that I did so well. Right, okay, well, with the quiz out of the way, it's time to say goodbye, and we'll see you next time on the Retro Odyssey podcast. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.